you need to trust the people you have appointed, and then leave everything at the board level and not take control of anything at the ministry level. Right now, the nightmare for the administrators is the infrastructure aspect of it. We don't have autonomy to bypass any rule, even if the source of funds comes from the private people. You can't even expect anything out of it, because you have never interacted with anybody outside of your comfort zone when it comes to formulating that problem. I am not against our students going out for their graduate studies. We should encourage that. As a country, we must send our students to the top schools all over the world and then try to get them back into the country.
In today's episode of the KVKurious Podcast, we have Professor Ramgopal Rao. Professor Ramgopal is the Pillay Chair Professor at IIT Delhi, and he was previously the Director of IIT Delhi. In this conversation, we talk about what are some challenges faced by institutions and academicians when it comes to collaborating with industries and startups. How should government and industries look at promoting research and innovation at the academic and at levels of startups? We also talk about some unique perspectives that Professor Ramgopal Rao has when it comes to addressing brain drain. So maybe this conversation is also for you if you want to understand whether grad school is for you or not, whether should you do a master's or a PhD, or if you should take up a job and what kind of job, and what should you really do if you have to seek a career or pursue a career rooted in innovation. I hope you find this conversation insightful, so stay tuned on the KVKurious Podcast. Hi, Professor Ramgopal. Thanks a lot for making it to my podcast. Super excited, super privileged to speak to you and what and how the institutions and industry and startups need to collaborate to sort of put India on the race towards the $10 trillion economy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, so I think 15 days ago, you posted an op-ed in one of the newspapers talking about, how the budget should promote more of higher education and R&D. So after yesterday's budget, any thoughts on, what is being done, what needs to be done?
I think a lot more needs to be done. Unfortunately, we are stuck in a historical kind of a legacy. I mean, no government has been able to do enough for education, and even the budget allocations, though they have been made, when it comes to expenditure, we aren't even meeting what is allocated to us. We are not even spending whatever is the money allocated in the budgets. If you see even the last year budget, I think certain amount of money was allocated, but I think the actual expenditure fell short of even that expenditure. I think a lot needs to be done. As a percentage of GDP, nothing much has changed now. The total education, when you look at school, college and all that, I think it was some 2% to some 2.1% or something. But the higher education is still stuck at 0.7%. And I think, a lot more needs to change. And I think this is not about one particular government or this government. I think India traditionally has been undervaluing its resource in terms of the higher educational institutions and IITs. I think we are one of the lowest spenders as a percentage of GDP when we compare ourselves with the rest of the countries, particularly those which are the knowledge economies. I think I would hope to see a day when we will spend 3 times, 4 times the current budgets.
Got it. So when you're telling that expenditures are much lower than the allocated budget, do you mean that governments are not giving away as much funds, or institutions are not spending it despite having funds?
It happens at both the ends. Institutions are also not able to spend because I think the bureaucracy, the bureaucratic ways of spending money have only gone exponentially. Now, in the name of centralizing the processes and transparency, which of course will be required, but then spending has become so much more complicated these days. Ordering any equipment, there are more approvals required than ever before, and all of that is delaying the process. In a place like IIT Delhi or any other IIT, ordering any equipment today takes about a year or more. I think that's hurting research. And when you want to place orders if you have to go through all of these channels and get ministry approvals under some pretext or the other, now it has become a norm. I think with all of that, I'm not very happy with the way, we are mandating expenditure. And secondly, even from the ministry, receiving grants has always been a challenge, and it's always less than whatever has been allocated. I think that is a trend most of the time right now with government systems.
So what you're saying is that it's not just about budget allocation, but even once budget comes to the institution, at the institutional level, there is complex bureaucracy that's really making the process harder to source funds for your projects.
GFR, I think that is what is the culprit here. And to purchase, let's say, a stack of papers, a bundle of papers, or purchasing a transmission electron microscope, the process is similar. And I think that hurts us right now very badly, because when you are ordering technical things, you cannot follow the same process as ordering a laptop or a printer kind of a thing. And I think all of that is hurting the system very badly now. We have always been asking for a separate, financial rules for research purposes. For when it comes to purchases and all that. From the government side, there is also an issue of transparency. They are worried about funds being misused and all of that. But I think somewhere you need to, devise a system in consultation with the stakeholders and trust the people in the system. I think at the end of the day, all these institutions have boards of governors, or the board of governors for each institution. And, the board of governors is completely a ministry appointed body, and you need to trust them. I think leaving everything at the BOG level would be a great, time saver for these institutions, because, there is no autonomy anyway for these institutions now, since all boards and chairmen of these boards in IITs are appointed by the government. You need to trust the people you have appointed, and then, leave everything at the board level and not take control of anything at the ministry level. That unfortunately is the situation right now. And where, many powers now are not with the board anymore. They have gone back to the ministry. And once it goes to ministry, you cannot also blame them, because they are dealing with 130, 140 institutions and a large number of other issues. And for them to worry about what a faculty member wants to buy and verify whether that purchase is valid or not, I think all that is, completely irrelevant and unjustified. And I think somebody is very wrongly, advising the government on some of these matters.
Interesting. So when you say that, these board of governors are appointed by the government itself and that there needs to be a trust in them, but is it also not true that all of these complications arise because at the end of the day, we are dependent on the system for money? If the funds were coming in from, let's say, an external source, for instance, let's say some VC or private institutions, say some industries, then maybe we are not so much at the mercy of the system itself. And would you think things would be faster at that point, or easier at that point?
Yeah, that's a very, very valid point. And it also again comes back to the autonomy. And here it is the financial model. When it comes to running of our institutions, what is the financial model for running an institute? Look at a good American university. Where do their resources come from? One part of their resources comes from the tuition fee, right? Any good university you go, the tuition fee component is 15 to 20%. It can sometimes go up to 25 to 30%. But that is, one part of revenues a good university in the US would have. And the second resource is from the endowment funds. Right, you have now create endowments with the help of alumni and all that, and then you take the interest out of those endowments, and that sometimes can be depending on which institute you go to, 20%, 25%. Good institutions in the US. That is one part of revenue. The third part of revenue comes from the research that you do. When you do research, there is a overhead component. all these universities, any university you go in the US, the overheads can be anywhere from 40% to 60%. If you go to Stanford, give a project to a faculty member, university will take away 60% of that money. The faculty member will be left with 40% of those funds for the actual execution of project. That is the third source of revenue, an university will have. The fourth source of revenue, will be the other kinds of things which can come from, doing multiple activities on the campus, and government grants in public funded institutions, the local governments giving in money. So some of those, will be the other kind of revenues. Now look at the Indian situation. First of all, our tuition fee component is hardly 6% or 7%, right? In IITs, for example, only the undergraduate students pay a fee, and undergraduate fees are highly regulated by the governments, because governments don't want IIT education to increase, the cost of IIT education to increase, which is valid. I mean, there is nothing wrong in that. But therefore, the tuition fee component is only about 6% to 7% in any large IIT right now. The second component, which is the endowment funds, now for endowment funds, you need the right kind of policies, right? You need to encourage philanthropy in the society through right kind of taxation, to, all of that needs to happen. In India, there is nothing like that. There are the whatever policies that we have aren't encouraging for someone to give away their money to an institution, their alma mater, rather than passing it on to their children. So these sort of things don't really encourage any philanthropy in the society. We used to be much more philanthropic before independence, but after independence, everybody is after hogging as much as possible, to themselves, and then passing it on to their children. But in the process, the philanthropy component is largely non-existent. But even if even if some people are giving money, all money that comes to institutes becomes government money. Irrespective of the source of the money, the moment the money enters an IIT system, it becomes government money. So we have tried to, do something about it. IIT Delhi launched the endowment fund, but at the end of the day, as Government of India institutions, we are dealing with all of these kind of issues which are more policy related. And if a faculty member gives, let us say, some amount of money to construct some building, now the faculty member wants that building to be world class, and the optimally, utilizing his whatever money the alumni member has given, and also, he or she wants it to be, spent rationally, and with all controls and all of that in terms of quality, expenditure, and all that. But today, the money, once it enters, we have to again follow the Government of India norms. We have to advertise, and then we have to look at CPWD or NBCC or one of these agencies, which are most often the agencies which are executing the projects on the campus. The quality, the timelines, all of them become an issue on our campuses right now. Look at any IIT or any government funded institution right now. The nightmare for the administrators is the infrastructure aspect of it. Even if you have money, hiring a contractor to execute the project in time without any cost overruns is a nightmare right now in our system, because we don't have autonomy to bypass any rule, even if the source of funds comes from the private people, and from the private sources. So that is where the endowment funds, though we are all trying. IIT Delhi, when I was the director, we launched the endowment fund, and after that we saw at least 100 crores per year, kind of money coming into IIT Delhi as part of the endowment kind of a program. And we had a full team of people, interacting with alumni, bringing them on board, convincing them on the need for their funds to come into IIT. So a lot of things we did, but again, the policies, we have also tried to work with the governments to see if we can make these policies simpler in terms of expenditure and all of that. I think that is still an ongoing process. It requires much more work. So the endowments, that's a different story. So therefore, that is hardly existing right now in our system. And the third aspect is the research budgets, right? IIT Delhi every year does about 300 to 400 crores of research. But if you look at the average overheads we receive on this research grant, it is 5%, actually less than 5%. meaning the faculty members get money to execute a project, but only 5% of that money comes to the institute as overheads. So compare it with 60% that some universities in the US get as overheads to 5% that we get as the overheads. So the more projects we do, the more burden these projects become on the institutions, because since institutions don't receive overhead, managing these projects, managing the assets that are created with these projects eventually falls on the institute, becomes the institute responsibility. So therefore the research projects are not money earners, as far as the institution is concerned. So that aspect is also not there. And the other things like renting out spaces, or those are all minor things. We don't really make much money out of any of these matters. So I think this is a lack of financial model. So we don't have that endowment kind of a thing, which is really supported by government policies. We don't have the research projects, getting money to the institute as overheads. We don't even have the tuition fee component. So in the absence of any of these, we have no choice but to completely rely on the government sources, and that is how we become dependent on the government. And I think this is all therefore linked to one another, right? If you want us to become independent, you give us the autonomy, institutions can become independent. Look at BITS, for example, the BITS Pilani campuses. They are completely independent. BITS, you will find, is as good as many IITs right now, and they are completely self-supporting when it comes to their education and all of those kind of aspects. IITs being much higher in terms of the brand value and all of that, can easily do that if that autonomy is given to us. But then it doesn't work like that. And in the absence of any proper financial model, I think these institutions are made dependent on the government. And then when the government funds are not sufficient, and because of the government funds, we need to follow all the Government of India norms, which are not even meant for research kind of projects or research kind of equipment purchases, we tend to struggle, and it is a struggle all the way. I mean, it has not been very easy, for IITs all these years. It's again not to do with one government or the other, but the problem is it has never been the priority for any government. And creating institutions, all governments have done very well, but running these institutions, putting in place a proper financial model, providing them the right kind of an autonomy, to run their affairs on their own. Some of these, no government has been very forthcoming in the country in the last, so many years that I have been in the higher education space.
Got it. One thing that you mentioned is really caught my attention is that the overheads is roughly around 5% in Indian institutions. And you're mentioning that it does not bring in income to the institution, and I can agree with that. But at the same time, don't you think that if the overheads is less, it actually means more capital at the dispense of the profs and the researchers, which should ideally accelerate the pace of research and innovation?
No, but the total pie is small. Look at the amount of money the agencies like DST, all of them actually receive. How much money are we spending in higher education, in research and all of that is still very low as a percentage of GDP, right? That is still about 0.6 to 0.7%, while China spends 2.6%, 2.7%, South Korea spends above 4%, and Israel spends above 4% of their GDP. In India, the total pie is very small, and the community is large right now, and therefore nobody gets enough money for anything right now. So it's a subcritical funding everywhere. And then, but our expectations have become so high. We want to be the leaders of the world and everything, but the pie available for doing research from government sources is still pretty small in this country.
Got it. And you're mentioning that sourcing money from private sources is also not an option, because at the end of the day, it still becomes government money once it comes in.
It is good to have private funding, which is, though it is not very high, but I always, as a researcher myself, I have always had industry projects. The reason why I did the industry projects, not because I could create major assets or anything, in the institution because of industry projects, but they give you the right orientation. They give you the right set of problems to work on. When you are working for an Intel, they wouldn't expect you to work on something which they cannot even use in the next 10 years. Then the problems become very relevant. And that is the reason why I have always had, industry projects going on in my group, and which even provides employment for students. When students work on Intel problems, then they become, eligible to, or rather, very, what do we call it? All these industries would want to have these students because they have worked on the right set of problems which are relevant for the industry. And I think from that point of view, I would like to have more and more industry projects, but I wouldn't, think that the industry projects will help create, any major research facilities or anything. That is not the case even in many advanced universities. Maybe once in a while you might get those tens of millions of dollars of grant, but everywhere these grants are hundreds of thousands of dollars. And with that, you can run a good project working on a good problem, but you cannot, buy any expensive pieces of equipment with the industry projects. That is where the government funding is still very critical, for creation of those assets in academic institutions.
Got it. But when you say that industry problem statements are much relevant, and that is why you pick them because it gives you the right orientation, can I also sort of derive a corollary out of that and say that academics who are not working on industrial problems, or people who are choosing to work on their own problems, are working on problems statements that are probably not as much relevant, or probably doing it, let's say, to churn out publications that might again not have snowballing impact. Would you agree with that, or if not, what else do you think is the problem?
That's a very good way to put it. In fact, I have always maintained that, and internally among the faculty, we have always debated this. IIT system is the best if you want to stick to one problem, right? Work for 20 years. And because I am not dependent on any external source of funding, as a faculty member, I get certain number of PhD students supported by the institute. And if my area doesn't require huge facilities or anything, I can stick to one single problem for 20 years and I can, do great work. I can get Nobel Prizes out of this system, because in an American system, every 3 years or 4 years, you are changing your areas because the funding agencies are dictating what a faculty member would work. That is definitely not the case in the IIT system, because you don't have to depend on the external source of funding. Even when it comes to your PhD students in America, for example, you go to Stanford kind of a place, you need $250,000 to hire a PhD student. That is what it costs now in some of these top schools when it comes to hiring a PhD student, given their overheads and the cost of having a PhD student and all of that. But in India, that is not the case. And because it is not the case, you can get high quality students, stick to a problem for a long period of time, and become that experts in that area, which can lead to a lot of recognitions for the country. So I think the Indian system from that point of view is good, but so not every area you can do with a pen and pencil, right? You require high-end facilities, and if these high-end facilities are not made available, then you are always, most of our research is, to do this research, I need this piece of equipment, but I don't have that piece of equipment. Therefore, you try to bypass, how can I do the same research without using that high-end equipment? So it's a poor man's way of achieving the goal. In the process, most of our research tends to look for frugal solutions to these complex problems. And, not everything will work that way. If you are only searching for, a cheaper way of achieving the same objectives, it doesn't always get recognized the same way. Somebody who has, access to all those facilities will any day be ahead of you, while you are always struggling, how can I do that research because I don't have this 10 crore worth equipment, anywhere in my institute and all of that. So some of these, is what comes in when you choose research problems to work on. And therefore, we always tend to be a kind of a followers. And most of our research tends to be bypassing something because something is not available kind of things.
Got it. It's interesting that you mentioned in US universities the cost of hiring a PhD student over their duration of PhD could be as close to $250,000, right? And in India, you're mentioning this budget is much lower, and you're telling it's a strength for the Indian system because it can attract more students. Despite that being the case, we see that most students would still want to go to, let's say, US to at least pursue their education, even if not work there. Although part of the reason for going there is also the job opportunities and the higher paying opportunities that come with it. But more importantly, you mentioned that this kind of system in India can allow for much diligent research and, let's say, more recognition and more fundamental breakthroughs. But we also notice that the rate or the pace at which fundamental breakthroughs and tech transfer happens is much higher in the US institutions than in India. So why this disparity despite the Indian system being favorable?
That's again, it all comes down to the lack of industry collaborations. There are great people you will see in India. You go to Jadavpur University, you will find some of the finest brains. But you look at the kind of problems they are working on, most of them don't have a relevance. These are all things which are, beaten to death elsewhere. But these people have started working on it, continue to work on that. And you will find such situations in most of our, good institutions and also with good researchers, in many institutions in India. We are not working on the right set of problems. That is our challenge right now. And, we are not working on the right set of problems because we are highly siloed. The higher education system in India is, is completely siloed. If I want to do engineering, you go to one kind of institutions. You want to do medicine, you go to another kind of institutions. Pharmacy, other institutions. Management, other institutions. Agriculture, other institutions. That is the fragmentation which is hurting us very badly right now when it comes to, working on the right set of problems. And, technology development will happen when you work on the right set of problems. And for that, you need to collaborate with your stakeholders. If I am not working with DRDO closely, if DRDO has its own set of institutions, and if all their funding goes towards, maintaining and running those institutions, they have no motivation to work with IITs, and IITs will be out of that loop. Right now things are changing. In the last, I would say 5 years or so, DRDO has become much more open-ended, trying to interact with IITs and all that. But that should have, happened 40 years ago, not 5 years ago. But in the process, what has happened is many academic institutions in India have no access to anything that DRDO does. No access to any problems that they are currently working on, and they don't even have access to, let's say, agricultural areas, because Indian Council for Agricultural Research has its own set of institutions and they fund their own institutions, and IITs don't have much of a presence in agricultural areas because we don't even know what those problems are. And the same is the case with medical research. ICMR, they have their own set of institutions. I think this fragmentation has essentially, made sure that we don't get problems from everywhere. As a researcher, I can sit in my room, I can imagine a problem, and I go to Department of Science and Technology, with those set of whatever I imagined as a problem. I will be reviewed by my colleagues who are also professors, right? And then we talk to each other, it's a good problem, you work on it and you continue to work on it. The only thing that will come out of such a process is publications. You can't even expect anything out of it because, you have never interacted with anybody outside of your comfort zone when it comes to formulating that problem and all of that. And DST is not defining any problem areas, and DRDO is not defining any problem areas. In US, you look at DARPA, all the major innovations that have happened in the US have come as DARPA challenges, as DARPA projects. And similarly, look at NSF in the US. NSF has these beautifully written white papers, on every area that they want to start, very detailed, and then they launch those programs, and then you are all aligned to solving one particular problem. That way, the whole nation is now aligned towards solving these problems, and then you eventually solve it because you are putting in resources, you are channelizing all the efforts. In India, if you look at during the COVID time, it has happened. During the COVID time at IIT Delhi, we said the whole of institute will work only on COVID. We said, if you are working on any other problem, you can, vacate the labs and, you need to send back your students because we did not have enough ways to, deal with the COVID with so many people being on the campus. But we did say at IIT Delhi that if you are working on any aspect of COVID, you can stay here. We will even support your research internally because now you cannot go out and get any funds. Your students can stay back in the hostels. Once we made that announcement, within 1.5 years, IIT Delhi did, wonderful kind of things. We had, for example, all these masks initially was a problem. IIT Delhi developed masks, the Kavach brand, which came out of IIT Delhi, sold in millions kind of a thing. And these are all N95, N99 equivalent masks being sold at 40 rupees, 60 rupees. Our textile department pitched in and then started building these masks with world-class kind of standards and all of that. And similarly, during the peak of COVID, when the RT-PCR tests were being charged 4,500 rupees, we launched an RT-PCR kit through the ministry, approved by ICMR at rupees 399. Once we launched it, the entire cost of RT-PCR over a period of time came down to 700 rupees or so. Then within a few months after that, we were able to launch a 50 rupee antigen kit, an antibody kind of a kit. And that is 50 rupees. We again got approved by ICMR. The whole campus, we started testing people using our own, antibody kit. And, that made a huge difference. And then masks to these diagnostic kits, all of that came out of the same system, in 18 months of time. The only reason it happened was all these researchers were very focused on finding solutions to a problem. So once we were able to channelize, once we were able to connect them with a proper problem statement, it made a huge difference to the institute. Even I did not expect the kind of depth that exists in the academic system. But once COVID is gone, everybody has gone back to their own research areas with 700 faculty working on 500 different problems. You don't really expect in any area any major breakthrough to happen. That's because nobody is defining any problems at the national level. Everything is a bottom-up kind of an approach, and in the process, a lot of fragmentation. If you want to work on any biomedical problem, you need the kind of a collaboration with hospitals, with the medical doctors, which is something which we did at IIT Delhi. During my time, we signed an MOU with All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and we started funding faculty at both the places to collaborate with each other. Now, many of those projects today are becoming centers of excellence and becoming technologies and products. I think, the problems are basically, that bottom-up kind of an approach, not a well-defined problem statements at the national level, no grand challenges sort of an initiatives in the country, and a very fragmented way of working, lack of multidisciplinary collaborations. I think some of these are coming in the way. Otherwise, there is a lot of depth in the system, and channelizing it, connecting them to problems, I think, to me, is what is required, for these institutions to be counted, amongst the best institutions in the world.
Got it. So you're mentioning that the one of the challenges is that we take a bottom-up approach to defining problems as well as working on them. That being said, since you brought up the COVID example, is it also not true that in the case of the entire institution working towards COVID challenges, while everyone worked on problem statements, the onus was also on the institution and maybe administrators like you, where you took the tech and those developments and actually put in efforts to take it to the market. Maybe you approached the ICMR, got the kind of approvals needed, you pushed it through the government, and you did a certain steps. You took certain measures that allowed the tech to go to the market. While in most other cases, let's say when the funding is coming from external sources, and particularly in the Indian context, once you've worked on the problem statement, there is no person, neither the funding institution nor the people who are working on it, who are putting in any efforts to take that tech to the market. So tech may be being built, but it's not being transferred to the market. And the reason I see this as a difference is because as a graduate student in the US, I've observed, as a PhD student, I've observed how if, let's say, a DARPA or NSF or a NASA is funding, a certain professor for a certain project, of course, the money comes in and we are put on those deadlines, hard deadlines to finish the project, give them the, POC or whatever that is, MVP, give them the working prototype, so to speak. And after that, it's the onus is on those institutions, be it NASA or DARPA, to take that tech and convert it into something meaningful and scalable. But I think that part is maybe missing in India.
No, I agree with you fully on that. In fact, during the COVID time, to get these tests approved by ICMR, right, and launch them in the country, and also have these kits, included in the tender documents, because the reason why we could bring the cost to down to 399 and not 4,500 rupees is because we used different ways of testing and doing the RT-PCR. But then when ICMR releases tenders, because ICMR was doing it for the whole nation, for all the states and all that, the states were also copying whatever were the tender specs of ICMR for procurement of these kits. Getting it into the ICMR, tenders, I can tell you, I can write a book on that. And I was telling our management school, to use that as case studies. Unfortunately, in India, it's more than Atmanirbhar, the Atma Vishwas, the self-confidence is completely missing. Many of them think that something imported is always good. They have tested this kit themselves, right? And they have subjected it to all the tests that they would have done for any imported kit. But at the end of the day, they are not confident about this kit. And that was a kind of a challenge that we faced at every step of the way. And I had to, go to with the faculty members. I had to approach everybody in the government system, all the way up to PMO, to get it launched, to ensure that it is included, to fight out, many of these battles. It was not a very pleasant and not an easy task. And when some faculty members in other IITs, said that we also have a kit, can we get it tested by ICMR? Can we launch it? Then they started approaching me, because we had done that from IIT Delhi. I said, look, my bandwidth is also limited. And because I am at IIT Delhi, because I am in Delhi, and these are all IIT Delhi faculty members, I could go ahead and fight these battles. But if I have to do that for every other institute, it's not going to happen. Your directors need to take it up. But for a director sitting in, somewhere far away, getting it done, that is the kind of a process, that is the kind of a problem that we have right now, because at every stage there are lobbies, right? And then there are this lack of self-confidence in anything Indian. I think some of these are coming in the way right now. It will take more time, for these technology transfers to happen, smoothly and more easily. It will require that industries in between. Right now, the one players IITs are able to work with very well are the startups. Many faculty members have startups, and these startups can work with other manufacturers and others. So we were able to put out these kits simply because the smaller companies, the micro and small scale companies, they were able to absorb these technologies, commercialize that and do all of that. But these bigger players were never there, so the Reliances and Adanis, all these people, taking up these technologies would have done that probably more efficiently and with a much higher impact. But, in India, not having a good base of such technology industries, right, and who can absorb what is happening in these institutions and put it out into the market, I think that is a missing link again, that not having, that manufacturing industry in the country, like what exists in a place like US, I think the deep tech kind of industries, I think lack of that in India. Our, big industries are all IT, and some of these now are coming up, but I think that is a lack of ecosystem that exists in the country. So our, our path to getting something into the market now, which is working well, which is becoming more and more prominent, is through the startup route, and that has now become, for example, in my case, I have two startups, and both of them have been able to launch the products, but I couldn't have convinced any major agricultural player in the country to take up my technologies and launch it. If they had done that, things would have been very different. But because it is all done through the startup route, it's taking time, and these startups have their own challenges to meet. So all of that is taking a little bit of time. I think it again comes back to that lack of that ecosystem, concerning the academia industry collaborations. The faculty members are good. The students are doing their job in these institutions, but that last mile, is still pretty challenging for many of us to take our technologies to the market, kind of a thing.
So do you think the leadership has any role to play in building about this ecosystem?
I would think, a lot can happen. I would also attribute some of that to the leadership role, because even the cultures are set by the leaders. right? I mean, in an institution, how do I make it multidisciplinary? At IIT Delhi, for example, when I joined, one thing I noticed through, all my studies was the multidisciplinary activities aren't as much as what I would have liked. People, going out of their comfort zones, interacting with each other, they were not really as prevalent as what I would have liked. And I, as a technologist myself, having developed products and putting out them into the market, I know that unless you have multidisciplinary teams, you cannot really go beyond publishing papers and filing patents. So the technology development always, becomes multidisciplinary in nature. So we started a program called FIRP, Faculty Interdisciplinary Research Program. The only thing we said was, if any faculty member wants to work with any other faculty member, for a mechanical faculty member to work with a biology faculty member, if you come up with a good proposal, both of you sitting together across a table, decide what you want to do, then we will fund both of you with whatever money that is required to take a student, to hire a student, and to get some consumables and start doing research together. So we gave them 5 lakh rupees each, for 2 years. So 20 lakhs is what institute spent on each of these projects. That is basically as a seed grant. So once a mechanical faculty works with a biology faculty, after working for 2 years, we put the condition that you need to go out now, based on the work that you have done over 2 years, and get external projects. So you need to write proposals to industries or to, any other agency outside. So that was a condition we put. We invested, during my time alone, at least 20 crores we invested in supporting such projects, not only between departments, even across the institutes, where, for example, I see the AIMS would fund their faculty, we fund our faculty, and then they work for 2 years, then they go out and write proposals. And we did it with at least a dozen institutes, in and around Delhi. And the results were very clear. After about 3.5 years, 4 years, when I looked at it, the returns on that investment of 20 lakhs were at least 10 times. We were able to receive many more projects, because now people are working with each other, entering into domains, which are not tried before, and writing good proposals and good papers. Now I see, any department I go right now, in any capacity, I always see somebody saying that, this is that scheme FIRP you started, which has now made me interact with this faculty member in this department, and we were able to do some great things kind of a thing. I think that those incentives we need to create, and these incentives, unfortunately, aren't available as much at the national level. And as a result, there is, without that incentive, it all comes down to preaching. Everybody is saying you should do multidisciplinary research and all of that, but in the absence of any incentives, any motivation for faculty members to for doing that, things remain as it is. And even industry collaboration, we have been preaching in this country, academia should collaborate with industry, and even industry says so, academia says so, but nobody wants to create any mechanism, for those collaborations to happen. So that was one of my op-eds recently, where I said, can we mandate industries to spend certain percentage of their revenues collaborating with academia? My point is, once you start working with them, you will actually find a win-win kind of a partnership in many of those cases. And after that, you would like to collaborate with each other, because you see a value generation out of that. So, but initial things need to be incentivized, for anything like that to happen. And even when it comes to leadership, I have always been arguing with MHRD. If an institute, if an IIT, let's say, receives 100 crores of money from industry, you announce that you will give another matching grant of 100 crores, right? So if you say that, I will match you as much of industry projects that you get, then the directors, faculty, we can push everybody to go and connect with industry and then get more industry projects. And because we will know that if I do that, I will get more, budgets for the institute. I think that is a kind of a motivation that we can build in. In the absence of, such a kind of a thing happening at the leadership level, I think it all comes down to just preaching, and these preachings may have some effect, but unfortunately, it will take a long time. And the pace of growth in that direction will be, pretty slow, which is what you are seeing right now. IITs 70 years ago or 50 years ago, you see the industry academia collaborations and see them today. You wouldn't have seen, you would have seen only an incremental kind of an increase, but nothing nothing which is very abrupt kind of a thing. I think we need to address these through policy kind of interventions. And that is where I believe the leadership definitely matters.
Got it. But when you mentioned that we have to incentivize academic research and incentivize academicians to collaborate with industries, and that is what you seeded that idea through the FIRP, and it makes sense. That is for multidisciplinary, and for collaborations with industries, you're telling that you need to mandate industries to collaborate with academia.
But it's not industry. You make ministries to match the grants that you receive from industries. It can even come from. I think there need to be some incentivization.
Sure, but that is an incentive to the faculty, right? But what is the incentive to the industry for them to collaborate with academia?
Because that incentive they will find. It's a chicken and egg kind of a problem. And because you are not collaborating with them, you think they are bad. And you think, nothing I can receive or get from them. But once you start collaborating with these industries, I think, there is a lot of potential in these institutions to contribute to industry problem. For example, in my case, as a researcher, I have worked with Intel for almost 15, 16 years, right? And I have received continuously grants from them. And recently I received a letter, from my collaborator in Intel, who said that the technologies we developed together developed at IIT Bombay. I was at IIT Bombay at that time. In my group, have gone into hundreds of millions of Intel chips. So Intel is claiming that hundreds of millions of Intel chips have benefited, by the collaboration that they had with us. Why? So therefore it happens. And if that collaboration had not happened, that would not have taken place. And I think this is the kind of a point. I think once you start collaborating, you will find some good people who can contribute to those technologies. And then eventually it will make an impact. But that will require a sustained and long-term kind of collaboration. Many a time industries come with these quarterly kind of targets. And I have given you money in this quarter. By end of this quarter, I want those results. They don't even appreciate the way the academic system works because they have never even collaborated with them. I think even with that these sort of what you need to collaborate with the academia, which kind of areas will work through those collaborations, which ones you need to do on your own. I think these are the things. There is a lot of learning that industries need to gain, but that will all happen only by initiating things somewhere. And then in whatever way it is, I think over a period of time, you build that relationship, you build that trust. And then after that, they can be on an autopilot mode. But initially, you need these policy interventions to bring both the parties across the table so that they can start discussing and start collaborating with each other. And it will be a win-win eventually, if we initiate it now. And right now, all that I'm claiming is there are no incentives for any side to actually do that with the other side. And I think that needs to change through, some policy interventions.
But here you're saying that a company like Intel and the collaboration made sense because the collaboration was for a sustained period of time, and that allowed for some fundamental breakthrough to happen, which is why it could become a part of, chips worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, in one of the previous episodes of my podcast, I had Dr. Preet Banerjee, who was the CTO of ANSYS, and before that, he was the Dean of UIC and has been a Prof at UIUC and stuff. And one thing that he mentioned is, companies like IBM, companies like Nokia, and the big conglomerates are typically willing to invest in such Horizon 3 innovations, right? Typically that take long time and might have some fundamental breakthroughs to happen. And it makes sense. But that being said, since the amount of time needed for anything meaningful to happen in such level of collaborations, it's almost a hit and miss kind of situation, right? Okay, we might say that if you put in money for a long enough period of time, you will see light at the end of the tunnel, but you don't know how long you have to travel before you see the light. So it is very not many companies or let's say corporations have the capacity to invest in such kind of innovations. And even if they do, don't you think they're better off doing it by building in-house teams? Let's say if an Intel or Google invests in a 15-member team in-house, pays them maybe a 20% above average salary, so that they have more incentive to work more productively, as opposed to let's say having 5 students with not as much experience and who are devoting, let's say, just 20 to 25 hours a week. Don't you think it makes more sense for industries to build these in-house teams? And if so, why do you think they should still go ahead and enter into collabs with academia for these long-term projects?
I think there is also a responsibility part. Eventually industries draw their employees from the academic system, right? They are not going to, where do they recruit from? They eventually need to recruit from these same institutions. And if they stop collaborating, then there will be a kind of a disconnect between what academia is doing, what industry is doing. And when they hire a staff member, obviously they need to spend that much more time in their training, in all of that, which over a longer period of time, doesn't benefit anyone. And I think, it's not about, it is still worthwhile taking that chance of engaging the university at all levels, so that when you hire people from that university, people, what they are working on, what are their skills, and that is a smooth transition from academia to industry. I think even to enable that, those interactions are very important. Even if it fails in 3 out of 10 cases, it is still worth taking that risk, because if that gap widens, it will not benefit anyone, and it will only hurt everybody in the long run. I think from that point of view, academia industry collaboration, so that academia is aligned with what the industry is trying to do, is very important. And there are many examples in my area. I can tell you, there are enough number of examples. For example, the FinFETs, right? In the semiconductor area, now the whole industry has moved to FinFET technologies, and the multi-gate kind of MOSFETs. It was not developed by Intel. It was actually developed by the University of California, Berkeley. So a university invention on FinFETs has actually what has made a revolution in terms of CMOS scaling. So if somebody had not collaborated with them, and if the Berkeley did not even know what were the challenges Intel and other companies were facing, and did not think of a solution to that kind of a problem, today we wouldn't even be at the 3 nanometer, 5 nanometer kind of a node. We would have been stuck at 90 nanometers and 130 nanometers kind of a node. I think that is what is the kind of an impact that can have. Look at the quantum technologies. IBM did not start quantum technologies. Academia has been working on quantum related areas for almost like 3 decades now. And all of that research now, once it started to yield, some outcomes, some results, and industry jumped onto that bandwagon, and then they of course built much larger teams and surpassed whatever university research can do. But the trigger to the disruption, originated in the university system, and I think that is why you need to collaborate with the industry. That one disruption that can happen can completely transform your industry, and I think that is a chance that is worth taking, even from the technology and disruption point of view. But more importantly, I think having that, kind of the handshaking with the universities, so that when you employ people, you have people who understand, what the industry requires, and will be able to contribute in a shorter period of time. I think from any point of view you look at, I think industries should not take this short-term view of 1 year, 2 year kind of a thing. Anything which is 5 years, 10 years down the line, it makes sense to engage with the academia in any part of the world, so that that innovation, cycles will sustain themselves for a longer period of time.
Got it. And you mentioned right now, when the academia industry collaboration is not as much significant, the approach that you take is predominantly having startups, or transferring your tech through the startups, and that is allowing some level of transfer to happen. What do you think are the challenges in, let's say, doubling down on these startups itself and allowing these startups itself to absorb more of these tech and take it to the masses or scale it?
That's a good point. In fact, again, I have always believed as an engineer and as an administrator that, you need incentives you need programs, you need, the advantage of having a program, or a scheme, is that you can measure the outcomes, you can measure the inputs, you can measure the outcomes, and as an engineer, you can optimize it. If your outcomes are not meeting, your expectations, you now have numbers to measure the outcomes, and then you can, make corrections in addressing that. In the absence of it, it all remains as, somebody saying something and then walking away from that, and there will be nothing that you can measure, out of those kind of statements. At IIT Delhi, to encourage faculty startups, we started a program. We called it FIRE, Faculty Innovation and Research Driven Entrepreneurship, FIRE. What we basically said was, any faculty member who wants to start a company out of their research, IIT will give them a 50 lakh rupee grant. 50 lakh rupees as the grant, and IIT will also give the faculty member 1 year of sabbatical. Earlier, sabbaticals were always taken to go abroad and teach in a university or write a book and all of that. But we said sabbaticals can also be given to do startups. And once we announced that kind of a program, there were many applications from faculty members, and then we started funding them. And that is how now the faculty have an incentive to start a kind of a company. And also we said all of that will count towards their evaluation for any higher position or anything. Where if somebody is filing patents after patents, right? If nothing is coming out of those patents, it doesn't help anyone. But we also started saying that if you have written this many papers, how many patents have you filed out of those papers? If you are filing this many patents, how many startups have come out of those kind of patents? These are all linked to each other. So we started even looking at some of those metrics. We started funding faculty, and I can tell you, it has taken off in some departments. I know every fifth faculty member has a successful startup. And some of these startups have grown very well. And once the faculty members are doing that, their PhD students, would want to do the same. For example, my two startups, one of them is no longer a startup. Now it is a full-fledged company. These are all run by my PhD students. So they, joined these companies, and now they became CEOs. They developed those products. Now these companies are doing pretty well. I think that is a process that needs to begin. Again, for something like that to happen, you need those initiatives at the national level. At the institute level, we could see these, impact of the interdisciplinary programs with the seed funding, entrepreneurship programs from faculty through that seed funding. I think, I've always been advocating, why can't we do some of these programs at the national level? I think, once you do them at the national level through these programs, you can measure the outcomes, you can correct them, as and when required, and, you set a direction for the country to, move towards. And some of these, unfortunately haven't happened, at any level outside of, some of our institutions. And I would like to see, such incentive kind of programs, being launched on many of these kind of factors. In fact, recently I was talking to one of the secretaries. One of the complaints was, in India, all the research is concentrated in IITs, right? Once you go below, right, the second tier, third tier institutions, there are lots of challenges kind of a thing. And then, everybody is telling IITs, why don't you, mentor these institutions? Why don't you, adopt these institutions and develop? But this is just saying that. And the moment you, for example, how do you address that? You start an initiative at the national level, you start a fund, right? And you say that this fund is available, only if you collaborate with these institutions, which are, tier 3, tier 2 kind of institutions. And unless the faculty from IITs, write a joint proposal with them, right? This proposal cannot even be considered under that fund scheme. If you say anything like that, I can tell you there will be hundreds of IIT faculty members going out of their comfort zones, interacting with these faculty members, writing joint proposals, and then executing these projects. And over a period of time, this culture of doing high quality research will also, percolate down to these institutions. And that is how you bring up these institutions in terms of research and all of that. But, we haven't ever thought about it. There are hardly any such programs where, which become eligible only if I collaborate with faculty in tier 2 or tier 3 institutions. In the absence of it, it's my conscience, right? If I want to work with somebody, I work. If I don't want to, I have already so many things to do. I don't want to. But just because somebody is telling me that I should do that, nobody is going to do, anything in these kind of institutions, because the faculty members have autonomy. They decide what they want to do. But if there are some incentives to collaborate, I can tell you a lot more would have changed in a shorter period of time, and lot many good things would have happened.
And what do you think are some reasons or challenges why such schemes have not come up in the national scale?
I would think leadership again,
Okay.
you know.
Okay, interesting. And okay, let's ask this, right? Since you mentioned many of your companies have, you had two startups. One of those has eventually become a company now, and it's predominantly your PhD students who took on, who took to the leadership of those companies. What do you think is preventing, let's say, much better PhD students coming into Indian institutions? If let's say someone from NIT or IIT, if someone who did their undergrad at NIT, BITS or IIT, they typically want to go to, let's say, a US institution or some European institution, depending on their domain of research, to pursue graduate school. And one of the reasons personally for that I'm able to think of is that if you look at the stipends being paid to these folks, although it might seem big enough, it's not huge enough to retain some of the best minds. But at the same time, it also makes sense when you tell that the stipend itself is big, because it's reasonably big so that you're able to get, let's say, people from middle to bottom of the pyramid, and they are able to sort of just settle into comfort zones with these stipends, because this is an assured sum of money that they're going to get anyway, regardless of the output of their research. So how do you sort of tackle this dilemma?
I think I'm not against our students going out for their graduate studies. We should encourage that. In fact, I've always argued that government should create 1,000 fellowships every year and send out some of our top students to the best institutions in the world, Stanford's, MIT's, any top institute you take, our students should go there, do their PhDs and then try to get them back into the country. I think that is what China did very successfully, and many of them, getting studied. Even South Korea did it very successfully with American universities. Whenever I talk to, leading faculty members in the US, they say that, Korea is doing this and China is doing that. Why is India not doing that? And here, we are preventing, making statements to prevent anyone going abroad as if it is a crime they are committing. I don't even subscribe to that view at all. As a country, we must send our students to the top schools all over the world and then try to get them back into the country. And that is how you learn new things. That is how you bring new ways of doing, new cultures, new research programs. I think that is very important. Otherwise, it's a frog in the well kind of a thing. Everybody, do I study in this institute, I join another institute, and I spend all my time, between these 2 or 3 institutions. You never get to learn, different cultures. You never get to enter into different areas and all that. I'm not a great advocate of doing everything internally and not with any external help. And I think that should happen. But we can learn from the South Korea and the Chinese examples of how they benefited from their such scholarship programs. And so therefore, but we should also be able to retain some of these good students in our system. After all, at least the IITs have a good PhD programs, and we are always looking for good talent, but we must be able to compete with the best in the world and try to retain them. The scholarship, the stipends is one issue right now, and I think that needs to change. I've always advocated that the stipends that we pay to our PhD students must match the entry-level jobs they would have got in any other place. It could be the government jobs, or it could be an industry kind of a job, because nobody should see that by joining a PhD, I am losing out, on something. And the current generation, good or bad, has started making all those calculations. And I never, had such calculations, when I was looking for doing a PhD. But now things have changed. I think these are all, it's a new generation. The millennials, they think differently. We need to accept that. I would believe that the PhD scholarships need to match the entry-level jobs in any, in another government lab, because with a master's degree or with a BTech degree, they can seek certain jobs in the government setup. I think what we pay to our PhD students must be at least equivalent of that. And so that is, I've always said that, and I hope, some of these will get corrected in a due course of time. And I think the PhD programs we need to strengthen. And one of the ways one can do that is by offering joint PhD programs. In fact, during my time as a director, we started the first ever joint PhD program from IIT Delhi with University of Queensland. So we created a kind of an academy. We called it UKIDAR, University of Queensland, IIT Delhi Research Academy. And then we said the students will be admitted into IIT Delhi, and students will also be admitted into University of Queensland. They get to spend 1 year on others campus, and that is hugely successful. In just about 3 years time, now we have 100 PhD scholars under the joint PhD program with one certificate and two logos kind of a thing. And we also started one more with NCTU in Taiwan, in the semiconductor areas, and that also has been pretty successful. I think, but in the UKIDAR program, for example, I can tell you, the students who have joined the UKIDAR program, they wouldn't have come to IIT Delhi, without that collaboration with UQ, and they would have gone abroad. And by creating such a collaboration or a partnership, we were able to retain them in the system. We were able to attract, some very good students into the PhD program, which otherwise would have not happened. I think that is what we need to do. So we need to create more linkages with the top universities in the world, and then try to see if we can retain them as part of the joint degree programs. I would personally believe that for PhD students, international exposure is very essential. So I think these joint degree programs also give them that international exposure. And sometimes what happens is, if I want to launch a joint degree program with a good US university, sometimes the funding becomes an issue, because the way the US universities work is very different in terms of the PhD programs, the graduate programs. I think that is where government encouraging IITs to start joint degree programs with US universities. We haven't been very successful doing any joint PhD program with any US university. We tried, but then no university is willing to allocate, let's say, resources for doing that. But with UQ, it happened, and UQ is one of the top 50 universities in the world, and that program has really taken off and worked very well. I think we need to do similar kind of initiatives with leading other universities in the US and elsewhere, and but that is where you need some financial kind of a support through some schemes of government of India. Otherwise, our industry, whatever way it will work, because the UKIDAR thing, though we started with internal funds, now we have a CEO whose job is to raise industry sponsorship for these PhD students. Our target is to have 50% of these students supported by the industries. And somebody is working very hard at it. And I can tell you, the way things are moving there, it will also happen. So I think some of these models are what we need to do more at the national level in a way.
Got it. And sir, what is one piece of advice you would give to someone who is just 2021, just out of BTech programs?
No, I have always said that, unfortunately in India, there is this FOMO factor, the fear of missing out, and everybody wants a job after BTech. I can understand those who come from poor family backgrounds, financial backgrounds, need to take up a job to support family. All that is fine. But even the middle class children, upper middle class children, they all want a job after BTech for some reason or the other. And the only jobs you can find after a BTech with that shallow understanding of any area are mostly IT jobs in India. So therefore, we are losing a lot of our good talent to IT in the country. And even at IIT Delhi, less than 5% of our undergraduate students go for higher studies. And that is a huge drain, when it comes to innovation or research in other areas. And the kind of jobs they take up, because they're all looking for a certain pay package and all that, usually the e-commerce or the accounting kind of jobs or fintech sectors and things like that. But imagine some of these top students continuing for a PhD, continuing for higher studies, doing good research in quantum areas, in AI kind of areas, in nanotechnology areas, in any area, biotechnology kind of areas, and coming up with new ideas and taking them forward as startups, as technologies, as innovators. I think so much would have changed in other areas too. But unfortunately, because we are losing out 95% of our talent pool to jobs after BTech, I think the higher education sector, the other areas are suffering in terms of innovation. And all the innovation is focused on fintech, e-commerce, and IT kind of areas, because that is where the talent lies right now. And I think we need to diversify this talent pool. We need to convince them to, not stop after BTech, encourage them through multiple ways, so for them to pursue higher education, so that, they will be the valuable resource, to develop new technologies in all of these other kind of deep technologies areas, right? Like the biotechnology, quantum technology, nanotechnology, AI, ML. I think that's nothing much is happening in those areas in India, simply because finding a good PhD student in a computer science department is very difficult right now. Because most of the computer science graduates end up with a job after BTech. The same is true of every other domain now. So therefore, finding no IIT is able to fill up all the PhD slots available for them, not because of the lack of number of applications, but because of the lack of quality of students who are applying to the PhD programs, and we are not able to fill up these PhD positions now. That is the current situation in our institutions, and that's because of all these drop-offs which are happening at after the BTech levels. So I would like to see more and more good students pursue higher education, get into deep technology areas, get into areas where there is a higher barrier for entry, start companies in those areas, make them big, like what you have these IT kind of industries. I think, I would like to see that sort of a thing happening slowly in the country now.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for these insightful suggestions and thoughts and perspectives, sir. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you very much. Pleasure talking to you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.